Okay. So chapter 7, it's been a while since we've talked about chapter 7, right? It's just to remind you, it's called Gyan Vigyan Yoga. And like I said, chapter 7 is where the Gyan or the Ishwar part starts. Up until chapter 6, the focus was, everything was being talked about, but the focus was on Karam, doing the right thing, Karam Yoga, how you, तुम्हारा प्रयत्न क्या है, how you prepare yourself. You know, फल की चिंता मत करो, काम करते जाओ, डू योर ड्यूटी. ये सब कर्म योग है. आप प्रिपेयर कैसे करते हो अपने आप को, राइट? दैट इज ऑल, दैट वाज द फोकस, इफ यू रिमेंबर, of the chapters 1 through 6. And then the 6th chapter actually was about meditation. They described what to meditate, how to meditate. वो भी हमने बात करी थी. How the meditator has to be ready. Only a Karam yogi can really meditate properly. A person who has no concept of Karam yoga, the person who has no concept of Antakarna Shuddhi cannot meditate properly. Uska man will be going everywhere. So that all that we talked about is preparation. Now 7th onwards, he's talking about Ishwar, the other part of Tattvamasi, the Tat part. And the last time we talked about chapter 7, we said how he starts with this. Now suddenly Bhagwan Krishna says, I am Ishwar. So when he says me, he doesn't mean Krishna as a person. He means himself as Ishwar. So he says, Parth, like, Arjun, I will tell you about my nature. That means the nature of Ishwar, the nature of this world. And he said, I have a dual nature. I have my para prakriti and my apara prakriti. The apara prakriti is Maya. That is what transforms into this whole world, this Jagat. The para prakriti is Brahma, is my nirgun aspect, without gunas, which cannot be known, which is what you are. That is my essential nature. As Maya jo hai, that is Sagun. That is Sagun Brahman is called Maya. Nirgul Brahman is the para prakriti. So he talked about that. Then we also went through, if you remember, the transformation that takes place, how the Sattva, Rajas and Tamas, which is part of the Apara Prakriti, which is part of Maya, how they transform into Tanmatras, they transform into elements, subtle world of space, air, fire, water and earth. You remember? Yeah. Then we said how those subtle elements combine through a process called Panchikarna to become the gross or the sthul elements. Let's say if you have to, from subtle air, you have to go to gross air, then 1/2 of it will be air and 1/8 of water, earth, fire and space will combine with it, all 5 together, and that will become stool air. So the stool air has 50% subtle air, but about 12.5% each of the other elements too. So we went through that process, and that was explained by Krishna. Krishna said he talked about an Ashtadha for Prakriti. That means an 8-fold way. We talked about the 5 elements. The 8-fold way is the Sankhya way of doing things. It doesn't matter. These are just different, slightly different cuts of the same thing, but the process was exactly the same. We also said how Krishna said the Prakriti comes and goes. In other words, it's always changing, and there is a pralay when this world will collapse back into unmanifest form, and then there'll be Srishti, which is when the world goes back from the unmanifest form to manifest form. It manifests itself. And we talked about how really speaking, everything that we see around us is nothing but nama rupa. It's name and form. There is a form, we give it a name. Essentially, it's just all these are forms. We think they're solid substance, but they're actually forms. And these forms are appearing in manifestation, they are disappearing when they get unmanifest. And that's all that is happening in this world. That is what creation is. The substance, the real substance behind this is Brahman. And that Brahman is the para prakriti of Ishwar, of Krishna. These forms which come and go are the apara prakriti or Maya. Right? So we explained the process of how the forms come, Rajas, Tamas, blah, blah, blah. But then they also unmanifest. And by themselves, they are nothing. There's no substance there. The substance is all Brahman, which is never changing. It never goes anywhere. It never ages. It is not in time. It is not in space. Space itself is just a form. The human beings, everything we see around us is just a form. So we covered all of this in the initial part of chapter 7, because in like the first 7 stages, these 7 sutras, mantras, Krishna said all this. He said, Krishna says from 4 to 7, he says his prakriti is divided in an 8-fold way. This is the 8-fold way. This is his lower apara prakriti. The higher prakriti, para, is the essential nature of the jiva, which is Brahman, by which the entire jagat is sustained. All beings and elements have their cause in this 2-fold prakriti. The world comes from and resolves into me. This is what we were saying, how it manifests and unmanifests. Back into me means back into my nature, into Brahman. All this is woven into me like the beads in a string. These are the exact, this is the exact translation of the words he used. That just like beads in a string are woven all together, they seem separate. The beads all seem like separate beads, and you can have different beads, but they are all part of the same string. And underlying all of them is this one sutra, which is connecting all of them. Similarly, all these names and forms they seem distinct, but underneath them, they're all woven together in Brahman. So that's just his example that he used. Right? So we covered all this from 1 to 7. Any question on that so far?
नहीं ठीक है.
We'll keep going back to this again and again. This is
again and again.
And when you have questions, we can talk about it. Now he goes on to the next part, which is now Sutras 8 to 14. And he further explains this in more sort of, layman terms. He's trying to emphasize what he just said. And he tells Krishna tells Arjun, I am the taste in the water, light in the sun and moon, Om in the Vedas, sound in space, strength in human beings. I am the fragrance in the earth, brilliance in the fire, life in all beings, and the discipline and its result in the ascetics. So he's saying, just taking examples all around him. So that means he's trying to say nothing is not me. And he's trying to say I'm the essence in all of these things. He could also have said, I am the ascetic, I am the water, I am the sun, right? But he may want to make the point. He's saying, when you look at the water, essentially people, when they think of water, they think of taste, because it actually has no taste. It's the essential nature of water is called taste. The swaroop is called taste. So I'm that. Sun and moon, we think about light. It provides light. So I am the light in the sun and the moon. It's just a manner of speaking so that people understand it and they remember it. So he's just emphasizing all this. Upar tak jo usne kaya tha 1 to 7. This is a standard practice, by the way, you will find in the scriptures. They start with the essence of the teaching at the highest level. They will say what they have to say very quickly, and जो सारांश है, जो गूढ़ गूढ़ है, वो बता देंगे. Then they go through a next cycle again, where they'll take it in a little bit more detail, ताकि अगर किसी को नहीं समझ आया तो चलो अब करते हैं. Then they will go through another cycle and go even more detailed, कि अगर किसी को अभी भी नहीं समझ आया तो okay, then spend time here. So it's like it's the pyramid scheme of doing things. They start from the top. In fact, Gita as a whole does that. The whole of chapter 2 and 3 says everything that has to be said. And the rest of the Gita then explains. And the same thing in this chapter. In verses 1 to 7, he's basically said it all. Right? But now he's explaining it in like more flowery language, in more, he's trying to make it, he's personifying things. He's trying to make them tangible so that people can begin to understand. So ये सारा ये बोलता है. Then he says, I am the eternal, sees in all being, the discriminating intellect, brilliance in the brilliant. I am the strength that is free from desire. All the good things, all the things that people want, people cherish, people look up to, he's saying, all that is me. Everything born out of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas is born out of me. They are in me, but I am not in them. This is a key statement. He says all that I am this, just to kind of emphasize that तुम किसी चीज को भी देखोगे, think about Ishwar. Next time you look at a rock, say, ये तो कृष्ण भगवान है, ये तो ईश्वर है. That's what he's trying to tell you. Nothing is away from me. तुम गंध को भी देखोगे, उसको भी कोई ईश्वर है. That attitude, इस तरह से बता रहा है आपको. हमको पता है ये, right? You know this because you know that everything comes out of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, and it comes out of. So we've explained all that. So intellectually, you all understand. Now he's saying in your real life, when you develop that bhavna, so that when you see anything in your life, you say, ये ईश्वर है. So you're no longer looking at things with, you're trying to see the divinity in everything. So this is much more of now he's gone much more something that a person can appreciate, a person can identify with, and he doesn't have to be a deep thinker or a Vedantist to kind of appreciate this. Like my mom keeps saying all the time, सब में ईश्वर है. My Masi used to keep saying this all the time. हर एक चीज में ईश्वर है, और सब चीज को नमस्ते जय जय करते रहते हैं. So that kind of a thing. But then he made this statement, which actually should be, I'm going to say, it should be a separate line altogether. Because this happens 2-3 times in the Gita. And next time I'll show you the actual Sanskrit. He keeps saying this, and this is very difficult to follow till you understand what we described in 4 to 7. He says, I am independent. The world is dependent on me. In other words, when you say that everything is in me, that means you're saying सब चीज का आधार मैं हूं. I am the foundation of everything. But he is also saying, you have to keep in mind that I am not in everything. In other words, it's not a two-way relationship where A is equal to B, therefore B is equal to A. It's not like that. The rocks and the jivas and the planet Earth and everything else which I've said, all these things he's described on top. All these things, he's saying they are in me. I am the taste of water, light in the sun, all this. So अगर किसी भी चीज को देखोगे, you'll find Ishwar there. But you don't need these things to find Ishwar, to be Ishwar. For these things to exist, Ishwar has to be there, because the substance behind all these things is Ishwar or Brahman. Ishwar and Brahman is interchangeable in Gita, in Vedanta. Whenever we say Ishwar, we mean Sagun Brahman. Whenever we say Brahman, we mean Nirgun Brahman. That's just something to keep in mind, always. Right? Ishwar just means we are thinking about Brahman as a Brahman plus Maya in its Sagun form. That's Ishwar. And but it's essentially the same thing because the essence of Ishwar is also Brahman. When we say Brahman, we are only thinking Nirgun. There is no guna attached. There's no form, nothing. So you cannot have anything if there is no Ishwar. Because Ishwar is the substance behind all these things. However, you don't need these things for Ishwar to be there. In other words, when these things are manifest, when the world is manifest, Ishwar is there in these things. When the world is unmanifest, that means these things are not there, Ishwar is still there. On its own. Not in these things, on its own. It is Swatantra. It is the only thing which exists. And it doesn't need anything else for its existence. Everything else needs Ishwar for its existence. So it's not a equals relationship. I think this is what he's trying to say. He says this a couple of times in the Gita. Just so we can understand this fact. That, and you know this is not new to you because we went through this in 4 to 7, right? We understood this. But remember, a person who does not understand this, who's now, a little bit less knowledgeable or less interested in philosophy, for him, he's describing it in a different way. He's saying, you think, किसी भी चीज को देखोगे, think of me, I'm in that. But then that fellow will say, oh, I destroyed the pathar. Did I also destroy Ishwar? Because there's an Ishwar in it. Right? And that's how he will start thinking. He's trying to say, no, bhaiya. No, you don't need the pathar for me. I mean, I exist on my own. I'm in the pathar. Even I'm also in the destroyed pathar. I'm in everything. But even when this world is unmanifest, I'm still there. So he wants to make that clear through this way of saying. First he says, I'm in everything. Then he says, I'm in everything, but everything is not in me. Now this also has to be explained because it's not easy to understand, but that's the whole idea. Then he says, the entire world is deluded by the objects born out of the three guna and does not know who is changeless and distinct from these objects. Exact, this translation. Because the world thinks that those objects born out of the three gunas, which is everything around us, Trey guna matlab sattva, rajas, tamas, we think they are real. But we do not realize that there is a changeless entity behind these, which is Brahman, which is Ishwar, which is me. Maya, which is born out of the three gunas, is difficult to cross, and those who seek me are able to cross it. This is a very famous, very, very famous mantra of the Gita. You know that this Maya, the way, because लोग कहते हैं माया से मैं कैसे पार लगाऊं, मुझे पार लगाओ माया से, माया में चंगल में मैं फंसा हुआ हूँ. And Bhagwan says, the only way to cross Maya is seek me. मेरी शरण में आओ, मैं तुमको पार लगा दूंगा माया के. So again, not meant for intellectual philosophers like you. You got it all in 1 through 7. But this is the same thing being said in more flowery, more beautiful language. People will remember this. Like my grandmother and all, they used to remember all this. They used to say, Ishwar tumhari naiya paar lagayega. Right? Those things, they may not fully understand what it is, but they get a sense that, yeah, there is Maya, that Maya is causing me vicissitudes in life, up and down of life. I understand that. I need support to get above these things. I will count on Ishwar to take me above these things. Now, that is a good enough message for them. They're happy with that. And they find solace in that. With you, I will say, if you say that, I will say, really? Is that Ishwar separate from you? Who will take you, who तुमको पार लगाएगा? जो ईश्वर का तत्व है और तुम्हारा तत्व है, उसमें कोई फर्क है क्या? नहीं है. It's the same Brahman. You already are there. तुम already पार हो. तुमको पार क्या लगाना है? Right? But that is a different sort of level. So Gita has this beautiful thing, it starts at the top and then keeps it. That's why Gita is so interesting for everybody. सबको कुछ ना कुछ मिल जाता है अपने मतलब का इसमें से from based on their level. Okay, time क्या हुआ है? 8:56. I mean, we can keep going on, but I was thinking maybe. So then, by the way, now he's going even further down. We'll cover this again next time. But he's now saying the Dushkritina, the Mudha, and all of this, the lowest amongst men are robbed of their discrimination. Discrimination. By Maya, do not seek me. Instead, they pursue sense objects. And then he now describes different kinds of people, different kinds of disciples. So I don't want to push too much in one meat thing. I mean, I can see that you guys are a little tired. We can talk about it next time, but we will cover this next time and we'll see how he now goes further and further. He talks about the different kinds of disciples. They come to me for different reasons. Some people come to me only जब दुख में होते हैं. Some people come to me जब दुख में भी होते हैं, सुख में भी होते हैं. Some people are mumukshu, some are gyanis, and he describes all that. So it's interesting.
Right.
ठीक है?
ठीक है.
Shall we call it a day
Yeah, sure.
or night?
10:30.
Any comments or anything else, Mukta, Sanjay?
नहीं, इसके अंदर वही जो लाइन इज टफ टू अंडरस्टैंड, जो आई एम इन एवरीबॉडी एंड नोबडी इज इन मी,
Yes.
वो जो है ना,
That is a tough line to understand. A very
टफ
important
लाइन.
line to understand, though.
So उसके